With FNCS around the corner, I thought it would be cool to highlight 3 controller players that I think are going to do incredibly well in this season's FNCS. Starting off with number 3, Aya Bafo. Bafo is no stranger to doing well in FNCS. He previously came 3rd in FNCS solos, and although last season he didn't make it to finals due to an underperformance in the heats, I think most people would agree that Bafo is one of the most prolific controller players in the region right now. Even with the lack of an FNCS finals appearance, the run that his trio went on prior to FNCS was one of the more impressive runs we saw throughout last season. They came 4th in our markup, 3rd in Razor Invitational, 2nd in a trio cash cup, and in multiple scrims and other third-party tournaments, they seemed like they were going to be the dominant team coming out of Steamy. And that's a huge credit to them because there were many top teams and top players who were trying to land Steamy. However, this season, Bafo is playing with Pablo Wingu and Downs. Now, Downs and Pablo came from the core of the trio with Pablo, Downs and ETQ, a trio that many had as their dark horse trios last season. Now, although those guys didn't necessarily perform up to where many would have expected them to, it's definitely something to be said that these guys are on an upward trajectory. Pablo's already considered something of a wonder kid within the region, and Downs' ability to lead the charge and make intelligent early and mid-game decisions is going to be incredibly useful for this trio. When I watched this trio last season, they really impressed me. They showed a knowledge and understanding of the game that you'd expect to see out of top trios within the region, but the one department in which it felt like they were lacking was that extra bit of firepower, that extra bit of creativity and ability to find refreshes in difficult endgame scenarios. Now, with the added firepower of Bafo and less pressure on Bafo to create refreshes now that he's playing alongside Pablo, Bafo could see himself replicating the success he had in Chapter 2 Season 3, and I think these guys are bound to be a successful trio this season. For number 2, I've gone with Amplify. I think this pick speaks for itself, as Amplify was already the highest placed and controller player last season, and I think for the most part, a large majority of the community currently feels as if Amplify is the best controller player in the game. Amplify and Matzo was seemingly a great choice for Benji to trio with, as they had shown with ADN that they could be one of the top teams in EU and one of the more consistent teams in EU. With Benji instead of ADN though, their ceiling has risen with many, including myself, believing that the expectation for these guys should be to win an FNCS at some point this year. Now, although some of you might be listening and thinking, hey, this is a bit harsh, maybe you're getting too early yourself, I think the signs are definitely there. These guys have consistently been able to do well in competition, and considering last season was their first sort of real-time playing with each other and they got 5th in the FNCS finals, it does show that these guys clearly do have the ability and the understanding. They all seem to share some sort of IGL responsibility, but Amplify in particular has impressed me with his ability to make great, decisive calls. What Amplify lacks in mechanical ability and solo prowess compared to some of the other top controller players in the region, he makes up for significantly in composure, intuition, and being a great team player. He's somewhat the glue of this trio, and although you might think he might not be able to hang with the likes of Bafo, Kiko, Wolfies in terms of his mechanical ability, he's definitely one of the more underappreciated players in what he does to make sure that Benji, Matzo and Amplify work well as a trio. Like I said earlier, there's no surprise that I have these guys in here. I think they're bound to do well once again this FNCS, and Amplify is definitely going to be a controller player who finds himself towards the top of the FNCS leaderboards. Now, before I get into the final player who I think we can expect to see do incredibly well this FNCS, I do want to do some honourable mentions because I know people are going to cry and complain because egos are a thing in competitive Fortnite. First person I'd put as an honourable mention is Wolfies. Of course, Wolfies did have a bit of an underperformance last season, not even making it through to heats, but in the time that he did spend playing with Lecce and Savid, Wolfies really impressed me. He showed an ability to be a lead in a capacity that I never thought he could do before, and I think when you look at this season, there's a good chance for Wolfies to sort of bounce back and really improve on the small foundations he started to build up last season in the qualifying weeks. At the end of the day, realistically, Wolfies is probably the greatest European controller player of all time, and so you always got to put some respect on his name in that sense. The next person I'm going to put on this honourable mentions list is another person hailing from the UK, and that's going to be Diablo. Diablo was part of the trio of Flecken, Bayon and Diablo, and they made it through to the FNCS finals via the reboot round. Now, in general, last season, these guys actually impressed me. They weren't a trio that I necessarily went into the season thinking was going to do spectacularly well, but they did show me in moments that they could be a top trio, and all of them individually being incredibly good players. With a great understanding of the game and a willingness to learn and improve, Diablo has shown me through his streams of him VOD reviewing his solo cash cup performances that he can be a player who really does well this season, regardless of who he's playing with. Now, considering he was one of the few controller players to make it through to FNCS last season, albeit through the reboot round, I think I definitely got to put some respect on his name, because I think he's an up-and-coming UK controller player who's going to start to wow people in the coming seasons. Last but not least on my honourable mentions list, I'm going to go with CRR. Chris really impressed me last season, being able to make it through to the FNCS finals in what was somewhat of a ringer trio, right? Playing with ZQ and Leo, who are great players, don't get me wrong, but definitely was a surprise. I think these guys making it to FNCS finals alone was a massive achievement for them, considering all the odds that were stacked against them. I think when you look at CR's resume, there's no reason to doubt that he has the ability to perform well and to make it to FNCS finals when needed to. It's just about whether he can find himself in the right situation with the right trio, and if he can motivate himself enough to grind and make it there. But once again, he's someone who his resume just speaks for itself. I don't really need to say much about Chris, but I think he is definitely somebody who we could see do well and come back into the fray as being widely received as one of the better controller players within the region. Last but not least, the third player that I think is going to do incredibly well this FNCS, and the player who I actually believe is the best controller player in all of EU right now, is Kiko. My Portuguese Magnifico, somebody who I've hyped up a lot on the broadcast and is hyped up a lot in general because he's become one of my favourite players to watch in all of Fortnite. Kiko is a young Portuguese wonder kid who has been on the up in recent months due to solid performances in all competitions. In last season's FNCS, Kiko played a massive part in helping his trio achieve 10th place, and in the only game they actually won, Kiko got 7 of their 13 eliminations that game, and that game was just a great example of how prolific he is as an endgame fragger. When preparing to make this video, I asked some pro players who I knew were familiar with Kiko to give me some thoughts on the player. Kiko has been described by some of his peers as having, quote, the most consistent aim of any top controller player, with mechs like a keyboard and mouse player, and he knows when to go for refreshes in endgame perfectly, end quote. This season, Kiko is playing with Scram and Putrick, and so I went to Scram to seek some more information about the player and how good and talented he really is. Scram described Kiko as being incredibly talented, and although he does need to be tamed at times, he is a beast who is incredibly good at adapting. Now, I have no fears about the fact that Kiko may need to be tamed sometimes. You have to take into consideration the fact that with all this talent, he is only just 14. But even with that being said, he's playing with Scram, who's a veteran, calming presence within the community, someone who's been around the game for so long. And if Kiko can spend a season developing under Scram, I believe he's going to be set to have even more of a bright future than he already has. Along with the fact that he's playing with Scram, of course, he's playing with the uber talented Putrick. And although it may seem like this is an unlikely trio as they all come from different nations and are speaking English, which is not their native tongues, they do look incredibly deadly together. Not only does Kiko have the talent in the server, but he has the support structure that breeds success. I recently got the chance to speak to Kiko's mother, who was not only one of the nicest parents I've ever interacted with in the Fortnite community, but the confidence and belief she has in her son gave me similar vibes to the likes of, Ann Fishies of the world and parents who we've seen be incredibly influential in their young gamers' lives. With this support paired with Kiko's work ethic and lack of an ego that seemingly plagues a lot of the young talented controller players we have in the scene, Kiko is bound for success. And regardless of whether he sticks with Scram and Putrick or whether he ends up going back to his all-Portuguese trio, whoever he plays with, I believe Kiko is going to be incredibly successful this season, and there's no doubt in my mind that he should be on this list. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like and subscribe. Comment down below who you think I've missed off this list. Comment down below who your list would be, and I'll see you guys all soon.